Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 22, 1991, 11:30 p.m. Two police officers, Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller, are driving through a rough neighborhood when they see a man running down the street with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. The man, Tracy Edwards, is hysterical, begging for help. He tells the officers that a man tried to kill him, that he barely escaped from an apartment where he was held captive. The officers are skeptical at first. This neighborhood sees a lot of drug activity, domestic disputes, strange behavior. But something about Edwards' terror seems genuine. They decide to check it out. They drive to the Oxford Apartments at 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213. A blond man answers the door. He's calm, polite, soft-spoken. His name is Jeffrey Dahmer. He's 31 years old. He apologizes for the disturbance, explains that he and Edwards just had an argument, that Edwards is his boyfriend and they'd been drinking. It all seems like a misunderstanding, but the officers notice a strange smell coming from the apartment, something chemical mixed with something organic and rotting. They ask to look around. What they found in that apartment would become one of the most horrific crime scenes in American history. Photographs of dismembered bodies, a human head in the refrigerator, a freezer containing human hearts and other organs, skulls, skeletons, an entire gallery of death preserved as trophies. Jeffrey Dahmer had murdered 17 young men and boys over 13 years. He had drugged them, strangled them, dismembered them, and in some cases, consumed parts of their bodies. He had turned his apartment into a literal house of horrors, and somehow, impossibly, he had gotten away with it for over a decade. Welcome to the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal, one of the most disturbing serial killers in modern history. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to explore how a seemingly normal man became a monster, how he evaded capture for so long despite multiple close calls, the horrific details of his crimes, and the questions that still haunt us. Could he have been stopped earlier? And what created someone capable of such unthinkable evil? Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On the surface, his early childhood seemed relatively normal. His father, Lionel, was a chemist working on his PhD. His mother, Joyce, was a homemaker. But beneath the surface, there were warning signs that something was deeply wrong. Joyce suffered from severe mental health issues and took large amounts of medication during her pregnancy with Jeffrey. After his birth, she experienced extreme postpartum depression and anxiety. The household was tense, with frequent arguments between his parents. As a young child, Jeffrey was described as energetic and happy, but around age 6, something changed. He became withdrawn, quiet, emotionless. He lost interest in normal childhood activities. His parents noticed but attributed it to typical childhood phases, or perhaps the stress of their deteriorating marriage. What they didn't know was what Jeffrey was doing in private. By age 10, Jeffrey had begun experimenting with dead animals. He would find roadkill or animals that had died naturally, and he would dissect them. He became obsessed with bones, with understanding how bodies were put together. He would bleach the bones with chemicals, studying the process of decay and preservation. His father, being a chemist, actually encouraged this interest at first, thinking it showed scientific curiosity. He taught Jeffrey how to properly clean and preserve animal bones. But this wasn't scientific curiosity. This was something darker. Jeffrey later admitted that even as a child, he had fantasies about death, about having complete control over another living thing. His teenage years were marked by increasing isolation and alcohol abuse. By high school, Jeffrey was drinking heavily, often showing up to class drunk. He was known as a class clown, someone who would do bizarre stunts for attention, but nobody really knew him. He had no close friends. He was discovering his sexuality. He was gay, but in 1970s Ohio, in a conservative area, this was something he felt he had to hide. His fantasies were becoming more specific and more disturbing. He fantasized about having a completely submissive partner, someone who wouldn't leave him, someone he could control entirely. In 1978, when Jeffrey was 18, his parents' marriage finally collapsed. His mother moved out, taking his younger brother with her. His father had already moved out months earlier. Jeffrey was left alone in the family home for several weeks, and it was during this time that he committed his first murder. The victim was Stephen Hicks, a 19-year-old hitchhiker. Jeffrey picked him up, brought him back to the house, and they drank beer together. When Hicks said he wanted to leave, Jeffrey panicked. He didn't want to be alone again. He grabbed a dumbbell and struck Hicks in the head, killing him. Then he did something that would become his pattern. He dismembered the body, crushed the bones, and scattered the remains in the woods behind the house. The entire process took hours. Jeffrey later said it was during this first murder that he realized he enjoyed it, that it satisfied something in him that nothing else did. Incredibly, he wasn't caught. Nobody even knew Stephen Hicks was missing in connection to Jeffrey. The murder went completely undetected. Jeffrey tried to move on with his life. He briefly attended Ohio State University, but dropped out after one semester due to his drinking. His father, worried about his son's lack of direction, convinced him to join the army. Jeffrey enlisted in 1979, but his alcoholism made him an ineffective soldier. He was discharged in 1981. After the army, Jeffrey moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. For a while, he seemed to stabilize. He got a job at a chocolate factory. He attended church with his grandmother, but the urges never went away. In 1986, he was arrested for masturbating in front of 2 boys. He received a 1-year probation. This should have been a red flag, a warning sign of escalating behavior. Instead, it was treated as a minor offense. In 1987, Jeffrey moved into his own apartment, and that's when the killing resumed. Between 1987 and 1991, Jeffrey murdered 16 more people. His victims were primarily young men, many of them from marginalized communities: gay men, men of color, immigrants, runaways. These were people whose disappearances wouldn't immediately trigger massive police investigations. Jeffrey targeted vulnerability. He would meet men at gay bars, bus stations, or shopping malls. He would offer them money to come back to his apartment for drinks or to pose for photographs. Once they were in his apartment, he would drug their drinks. Then, while they were unconscious or semi-conscious, he would strangle them. What happened next is almost too horrific to describe, but it's important to understand the full scope of his crimes. After killing his victims, Jeffrey would have sex with the corpses. He would then photograph the bodies in various positions. He would dismembrate them, carefully preserving certain parts. He kept skulls as trophies, sometimes painting them gray to make them look like plastic replicas. He stored body parts in his refrigerator and freezer. He dissolved some remains in acid, and in several cases, he admitted to cooking and eating parts of his victims' bodies. When asked why he did this, Jeffrey gave a chilling answer. He wanted to keep them with him. He didn't want them to leave. By consuming parts of them, by keeping their skulls and bones, he felt like they were still there, still his. It was the ultimate act of possession and control. But even more disturbing than the murders themselves is how many times Jeffrey almost got caught and didn't. In 1988, he was arrested for drugging and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he served only 10 months. During this time, he was supposed to be receiving psychiatric treatment. He wasn't. He was released in 1990 with probation, and within months, he killed again. The most infamous near-miss happened in May 1991, 2 months before his arrest. A 14-year-old Laotian boy named Conorak Synthesymphone escaped from Jeffrey's apartment. He was naked, bleeding, and drugged. 3 women found him and called 911. When police arrived, Jeffrey convinced them that Conorak was his 19-year-old boyfriend, that they'd just had a fight after drinking too much. Despite the witnesses insisting something was wrong, despite the boy being clearly underage and unable to speak coherently, the police returned him to Jeffrey's apartment. They even went inside the apartment, where a dead body was literally decomposing in the bedroom. But they didn't investigate further. They believed Jeffrey's story. Within hours of the police leaving, Jeffrey murdered Conorak. This incident sparked outrage and accusations of police negligence and homophobia. The officers involved faced no serious consequences at the time. If they had done their job properly, 5 more murders could have been prevented. Finally, in July 1991, Tracy Edwards managed to escape and flag down police, who actually listened. When officers entered apartment 213 and discovered the horror inside, Jeffrey initially tried to resist arrest, but he quickly gave up. At the police station, he was calm, cooperative, almost relieved. Over the following hours and days, he confessed to 17 murders. He provided details, led police to burial sites, explained his methods. He showed no emotion as he described what he'd done. The trial began in January 1992. Jeffrey's defense argued that he was insane, that anyone who committed such acts must be legally insane. But the prosecution argued that Jeffrey was fully aware of what he was doing, that his careful planning and attempts to avoid detection proved he knew it was wrong. The jury agreed. Jeffrey Dahmer was found guilty but sane, and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, a total of 957 years. In prison, Jeffrey claimed to have found religion. He was baptized as a born-again Christian. He expressed remorse for his crimes, though many questioned whether it was genuine or performative. He gave interviews where he tried to explain himself, though his explanations never really made sense. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you rationalize the irrational? On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, while on a work detail. Scarver later said that Jeffrey's crimes disgusted him, that he believed Jeffrey was unrepentant despite his claims of remorse. Jeffrey was 34 years old. Some people felt justice had been served. Others felt he'd gotten off too easy, that death was a mercy he didn't deserve. The aftermath of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes raised serious questions about systemic failures. How did he operate for 13 years without being caught? Multiple factors played a role. First, his victims were from marginalized communities. Many were not immediately reported missing, and when they were, investigations were not prioritized. Second, Jeffrey was white, clean-cut, employed, and articulate. He didn't fit the stereotype of a dangerous criminal, so police and neighbors gave him the benefit of the doubt. The horrible smell from his apartment was explained away as bad plumbing or spoiled meat. Neighbors complained, but nothing was done. Third, there was a significant element of homophobia. Police who encountered Jeffrey and his victims made assumptions about gay men and domestic disputes that colored their judgment and prevented them from investigating properly. The Konarak synthesymphone case became a focal point for criticism of the Milwaukee Police Department. An internal investigation found the officers had been negligent, but they were initially fired, then reinstated on appeal. One of the officers later became president of the Milwaukee Police Association. The failure to save Konarak haunted the synthesymphone family and the community. It became a symbol of how society's biases and institutional failures can literally cost lives. Psychologists and criminologists have spent decades trying to understand Jeffrey Dahmer. What makes someone become a serial killer and cannibal? Jeffrey himself participated in multiple interviews, trying to provide answers. He blamed loneliness, his sexuality, his family dysfunction, his alcohol abuse. But none of these things, individually or collectively, fully explain what he did. Plenty of people experience these issues and don't become murderers. There seems to have been something fundamentally broken in Jeffrey from a very young age, something that made him incapable of normal human empathy and connection. Some experts point to attachment disorder, possibly stemming from his mother's mental illness and medication during pregnancy and his early childhood. Others suggest he had an extreme form of paraphilia that combined sexual desire with necrophilia and a pathological need for control. Still others believe there may have been neurological abnormalities, something physically wrong with his brain. The truth is probably a combination of factors, nature and nurture, psychology and biology, that created the perfect storm of dysfunction. What's particularly chilling about Jeffrey Dahmer is how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't a raving lunatic. He was quiet, polite, and functional. He held down a job for years. He had normal interactions with co-workers and family. He was your neighbor, your co-worker, the guy you'd pass in the grocery store and never think twice about. That's what makes his story so unsettling. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks completely normal until you see what's behind the closed door. The victims of Jeffrey Dahmer deserve to be remembered as more than just statistics or parts of a horror story. They were real people with families, dreams, and futures that were stolen from them. Stephen Hicks, Stephen Twomey, James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Raymond Smith, Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, Anthony Hughes, Konarak synthesymphone Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, and Joseph Braidhoft. 17 lives cut short by one man's monstrous compulsions. Their families have had to live with unimaginable grief and trauma. Some have spoken publicly about their loss, trying to ensure their loved ones are not forgotten. Others have chosen privacy, unable to bear the public scrutiny that comes with being connected to such infamous crimes. All of them have had to grapple with the question, why? Why did this happen to someone they loved? And the painful reality is that there's no answer that will ever make sense or provide real closure. Jeffrey Dahmer's case has had a lasting impact on popular culture and true crime. Books, documentaries, movies, and most recently, the Netflix series have revisited his crimes repeatedly. This raises ethical questions about how we consume true crime. Are we honoring the victims' memories and learning important lessons about societal failures? Or are we exploiting tragedy for entertainment? There's no easy answer, but it's worth thinking about what we're really looking for when we engage with stories like this. Some good has come from the tragedy. The case led to reforms in how police handled missing persons reports, especially for marginalized communities. It sparked conversations about LGBTQ safety and discrimination. It highlighted the importance of proper mental health treatment and the danger of releasing violent offenders without adequate supervision and rehabilitation. These are small consolations in the face of such immense loss, but they matter. So what's the final takeaway from the Jeffrey Dahmer case? It's a reminder that evil exists, that some people are capable of acts that most of us can't even imagine. It's a warning about how easily we can fail to see what's right in front of us because someone doesn't fit our expectations of what a monster looks like. It's an indictment of systems that fail to protect the most vulnerable members of society. And it's a tragedy that never should have lasted as long as it did, with victims who never should have died. Jeffrey Dahmer is dead, but the horror he created still echoes. The families still grieve. The city of Milwaukee still carries the stain of what happened there. And we're still trying to understand how someone becomes what Jeffrey became. Maybe we never fully will. Maybe that's okay. Some things are so dark, so broken, that understanding them completely would require us to go to places we shouldn't go. What we can do is remember the victims, learn from the failures that allowed these crimes to continue, and remain vigilant. Because the scariest thing about Jeffrey Dahmer isn't that he was a monster, it's that he was a monster who looked like everyone else, living in an ordinary apartment, working an ordinary job, hiding in plain sight. And that means the next monster could be anywhere, hiding behind a normal face until someone finally looks close enough to see the truth. Thanks for watching this difficult but important deep dive into one of the darkest cases in true crime history. If you're struggling with any of the themes discussed here, please reach out to mental health resources or support services. And remember, true crime isn't just entertainment. These were real people with real families who deserve our respect and remembrance. Stay safe out there.